Hello, my name is Bartholomew Click, and in today's lesson, we are going to talk about prior knowledge, or rather, how to use cues, questions, and advanced organizers to more effectively present information to your students. This is oftentimes called activating prior knowledge, this entire strategy. So, any cues, any questions, any advanced organizers that you distribute are just activating the prior knowledge of the student. You're just getting them ready to learn what they're about to learn in one way or the other. And that's really important because background information is essential to your understanding of a lesson. If you are teaching a lesson on Abraham Lincoln, then the student who's read a book on Abraham Lincoln and the student who's watched Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter are going to be thinking about completely different things when you start teaching your lesson. And rather than focusing on how that can be a distraction on a student's prior knowledge could be interfering somehow for like a cultural reason or a personal reason, like the different movies we've watched, we're going to focus on how activating prior knowledge can be beneficial, how a teacher can deliberately invoke prior knowledge from previous lessons and sometimes from outside of the class to make students, to make the lessons hit the students a little harder and stick a little longer. Um, this is you already do this if you're teaching. You you do it. You do it most of the time. When teachers who were asked how many questions, when teachers were asked how many questions they ask in a class period, um, the teachers who answered that they think they ask 12 to 20 questions per class period, when the researchers doing this study measured those teachers and the number of questions they asked per session, they actually found that those teachers who thought they only asked 12 to 20 questions were actually asking something on the order of 40 to 150 questions. So you whether you want to or not, you are probably activating prior knowledge anytime you're instructing. Let's talk a little bit about what these things are. What is a cue and a question? Um, this is really basic, so I'd rather focus more on how to do it right and wrong. But a cue is exactly what it sounds like. You're just presenting the information that's to come. So if I'm teaching a lesson on the passive voice, I might go up to my students and say, okay, which one of you kicked my dog? Now, that's a question, but it's not really getting the students to think analytically or anything. So it's a cue. So I go up and I have this little performance piece. Okay, who kicked my dog? Which one of you kicked my dog? Oh, you don't want to take credit for it. Okay. You just want to say my dog was kicked. Let me introduce that the passive voice is a concept that avoids naming someone who did a thing. Um, so that would be cueing my students for this lesson about the passive voice. Questions are exactly what you think they are. Um, but rather than trying to invoke a curiosity response or just getting them to pay attention or to shock them or just simply prepare them, you're trying to get them to think about the content so that even if you are still talking, their brains are going. Um, the pitfalls of these is that they're so second nature, they're so easy to do that you might be doing it in a way that is counter effective. If you're asking really shallow questions, if you're presenting really shallow cues, then you might be getting your students to focus on the wrong content. And then the day of the exam will come, and the students will feel like you didn't cover any of this in your class. Remember, we can only remember so much of a lecture, and cues and questions tell students which parts are important to remember. So to effectively use cues and questions, we need to make memory points. So the teacher from Bueller's Day Off, who just is having his students unsuccessfully fill in the blanks. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Terrible question. But if you wanted to start your class off or your section on George Washington with why was George Washington a president instead of a king? A question like that, in the appropriate lesson, of course, is going to get your students thinking more deeply. And because they're going to be thinking, once you've asked a question that is intended for the students to brew on a little bit, you want to be quiet afterwards. Your students need time to process this stuff internally, probably a bit more time than you think. So give it a few beats, right? And don't call on the first kid whose arm shoots up. Like, let everyone in the class think for a minute. Wait for someone to look. Wait for a few people to look bored, and then start taking answers. You want to make sure that you're not talking while they're trying to think, or they're just going to skip ahead to the next thing you're talking about, and you've completely defeated the purpose of your cues and questions. All right. Advanced organizers are a little more advanced. But no, nothing. Okay. There's 3 types. So advanced organizers can be expositive, narrative, or they can be like skimming the content to come in some way or another. Expositive advanced organizers literally just, in today's lesson, we're going to discuss A, B, and C. You preview the content and you just tell the students what today's content is. Narrative advanced organizers are when you tell a story leading up to your lesson. If you're about to teach the students about tsunamis, you might begin the lesson with the story of someone who survived a tsunami. If you're going to teach about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you might talk about the gentleman who survived both bombings. And skimming is a little, it's a little less common, I think, but you would use skimming when you're about to show the students something that may require some spatial understanding, or if you don't want them to get lost during some kind of performance. Like if you're going to read a section of something, for example, you might pass out a piece of paper that has bullet points that tells the students what sections to look for. So it might have some questions on it. Like I'm going to read the first section of Romeo and Juliet, and the questions might ask the students, okay, who are the 3 most important characters? Something like that. Or if I'm going to go to a planetarium, I might grab some of the materials from the planetarium ahead of time and make a bunch of copies of it and pass those out to the students and just say, okay, everybody, take a look at this. Don't spend a ton of time reading it. Just flip through it very quickly. I want you to know a little bit about what we're about to look at before we look at it. And again, the whole point of this is so that when the students are taking the lesson in, they're taking in and remembering the parts we want them to remember, and not the parts that the monkey brain brought in with them. All right. Thank you for listening to my brief presentation on this. My only reference here is the book that, as near as I can tell, originally spawned these concepts. It's the classroom instruction that works by Marzano, R.J. Pickering, Marzano, Pickering, and Pollock. There's been a lot of other books that have kind of sprouted off this, and a lot of scholarly articles on this. So if you're interested in these effective teaching methods, just plug in classroom instruction that works into Google Scholar or a library resource, and just a massive ton of stuff will come up. Also, if you liked this presentation or the way it looked, here are the colors I used, here are the fonts I used. Have a great day. I'll see you soon. Bye.